We spoke to Dean in the last episode, and he was talking about because he did a swim from Newcastle to Sydney, the first Australian to do that, and there was a shark that was trailing him during that journey. But there's also when he was actually doing the Molokai to Oahu, there was a 14-foot white pointer which sat right underneath him the whole way, and he obviously had his shark shield. But have you had any instances during your races, some moments where you've really questioned the safety of the situation, whether you've had sharks trailing the boat or other creatures?
You do see a lot of sharks when you're paddling, so it's not uncommon to see a shark. I think probably I've only seen maybe one or two great whites in my that I know were great whites in my paddling time, and in those instances they've never appeared aggressive or look like they want to have a go at you or anything. They've just been a bit inquisitive. But we see a lot of hammerheads, we see a lot of other types of sharks, and definitely when I run my paddling trips in the warmer waters, you see the reef sharks and tiger sharks and those sorts of things. But no, I've never been I've been nudged once by a shark, and that was off Manly, and that was sort of the only time I think that I've had an incident where a shark sort of has shown some sort of aggression. But no, every other time I've seen them, they've actually taken off as quickly as we've seen them. So
Yeah, I think Matty said one of the things, and I always asked him about paddling through Sydney Harbour and bull sharks and that kind of thing, but he always said his biggest fear was the Manly ferry coming past and steamrolling.
There's no doubt that wayward boats or incompetent drivers of boats are the biggest risk that we face. There's no doubt about that.
We spoke in episode 12, we spoke to Kendrick Lewis, and when he was early on in his career, he decided to move away from Manly to the Gold Coast. And the reason he did that was he said that the Gold Coast had I guess you'd say, premier surf clubs. They were much more dominant than a lot of the Sydney clubs at the time. And got me thinking a little bit about your journey and why did you pick Manly over, say, going to some of the more northerly surf clubs up in Queensland that at the time that he was doing a lot of his surf lifesaving were renowned for being strong surf lifesavers in quite tough conditions?
Yeah, no, I've always liked Sydney. Sydney's a great city, and Manly's a great location. Northern Beaches to me is like one of the best places to live on earth, and I've been to a few places. And at that particular time, the strongest clubs in the country were there was one Gold Coast club called Southport that was really strong. Surfers Paradise were pretty strong, but Manly, Cronulla, it was a lot of Sydney-based clubs that were actually the strongest. And I spent a year at Manly. Then the next 2 years after that, Manly actually won the national titles in the point score, which I was super stoked to be a part of. We had some fantastic athletes coming through Manly at that particular time. All the top Ironmen were there, some top swimmers, pool swimmers, and all that sort of stuff. And we had an amazing paddling group, and I ended up running that paddling group out of Manly, and we got fantastic results with that group. And yeah, it was a really, really good time to be in Manly, and so yeah, we were the dominant club for a long period there. So that was a good time. Kendrick's obviously a lot younger than me, and since I gave up the life-saving stuff, my last life-saving carnival was in 1996. The whole thing shifted to the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast. The clubs up there have the ability to earn decent revenue through the pokies and their restaurants and their bars and things like that, whereas we don't have those facilities in Sydney. So it's a lot tougher for Sydney clubs to survive, and to survive and then support the athletes they're trying to get to their club. So I guess the big thing up in Queensland is they can do that.
Yeah, that was one point of discussion we had. We were talking about financially and the opportunities that were available for him up there at the time. aside from say Ken Vidler and Kelvin Graham, who were some of the more exciting but also challenging individuals you got to train with and compete against at the time after moving to Manly? I know some of the training partners you had included Ironman Guy Leach. Were there any others that come to mind?
Yeah, well, Tank Bennett, Greg Bennett, from Barry Bennett Surfboards.
Boards, yep.
Barry's son. He is a friend of mine, and we used to paddle a lot together. And then when I first moved over, there's a guy called Steve Wood, who was an amazing paddler and a very inspirational guy. So he used to sort of run the whole group. Then he ended up moving up to Queensland, and we had a good core group: Tony Vicelli, another guy, Tim Watkins, and then we had a whole bunch of youngsters that were coming through that were all really, really good. So it was a really good time down there. What's that?
Steve Wood.
Yeah, Steve Wood was he was sort of the inspirational guy. He sort of got everyone off their ass and made everyone work hard, and he's the sort of guy that you go to meet at 4:30 a.m. at Manly Dam for a training session, and he would have got there at 4:15 a.m. to do 15 minutes more than you. So that's the way he operated. So which was cool. And then obviously Leachy and the other Ironman guys. Leachy and I used to train together on Tuesdays and Thursdays in the lagoon at Queenscliff. And we used to do this session that we just smashed ourselves over a 2K effort and ran into shopping trolleys and all sorts of stuff in the lagoon. And we did that. And yeah, there's a bunch of guys around, but it wasn't just at Manly. There was the whole Northern Beaches. That was the powerhouse for surf lifesaving in the day. And all the Uncle Toby's and Nutrigrain Ironman were based on the Sydney Northern Beaches, whereas it's completely different now. So it was a very good time to be part of. And at that particular time too, water sport was huge here because all the world champions in surfing too had come from this area. Damien Hardmans and Barton Lynch's and Tom Carroll and all those sorts of guys. And there was a whole bunch of, top pro surfers. So there was a lot of activity going on in the water in this area.